Hello, this is the House Committee on Homeland Security's virtual roundtable on coronavirus and Homeland Security, Part 12, United States Postal Service Delivering for America. The purpose of this postal service is to provide mail service to the American people. The Constitution recognized the critical importance of this service and explicitly authorized the Congress to create post offices. The American people are clearly valuable to this service, repeatedly identifying the Postal Service as one of their favorite entities. In the rural areas of my district, the Postal Service is a lifeline. For small towns without reliable internet access, without a pharmacy, and without banks, the post office is the only critical connection to the outside world. It's the foundation of the community. According to data provided by the Postal Service, in Mississippi's 2nd District, there are 149 postal facilities, and I can tell you that many of my constituents, the Postal Service is the only option for sending and receiving packages and mail. The Postal Service has been experiencing financial challenges, and its finances have taken a huge hit at the result of the coronavirus pandemic. Even so, it is precisely in times of crisis like these that we are reminded how vital the Postal Service is. Americans who have been ordered to remain home to slow the spread of coronavirus have turned to the Postal Service knowing that it would still be there for them as it always has been, delivering to every household in America 6 and in some cases even 7 days a week. As we prepare to administer elections during the coronavirus pandemic, we will look to the Postal Service to ensure that no one must choose between exercising their right to vote and protecting their health. As we develop new tests, vaccines, and treatments for coronavirus, it is likely that we will rely on the Postal Service to deliver them to people's homes, much like our national countermeasures distribution plan relies on the Postal Service. And as we wait the storms that this hurricane season will bring, we will count on the Postal Service once again to bring communication and relief to the people in harm's way. The Postal Service has warned that its resources are dwindling fast. Even if it receives the $10 billion loan authorized by the CARES Act, a loan which the Trump administration is using to play politics, it could go broke a year from now. But we can save the Postal Service while respecting the hundreds of thousands of postal employees who have paid their lives, put their lives at risk to continue to deliver our mail and without hurting Americans by enacting arbitrary price increases to satisfy a presidential vendetta. In fact, the first critical step is already done. The HEROES Act, just passed the House last month, would provide $25 billion in emergency funding for the Postal Service. The Senate should immediately enact this legislation, and the President should sign it for the good of the nation. After that's done, we can come together and craft the reform measures that will ensure the Postal Service can continue to deliver for our nation just as it always has, and as the American people expect it to continue to do. I thank Congressman Cleaver, Secretary McHugh, and Mr. Sauber to join me today and look forward to this urgent discussion. I now recognize Mr. Cleaver for any opening remarks he may have.
Has been extremely important to me over the years. And I thank you for bringing this attention to this issue that it richly deserves. as I explained this, I have three sisters, and as best as I can determine, our maternal grandmother had the same Waxahachie, Texas post office mailbox her entire life. I was joking earlier about this. My grandmother died in 1995 at the age of 95. And as long as I can maintain my mental dexterity, I will be able to tell you, as well as my sisters could tell you as well, that Zora Gardner Alexander, my maternal grandmother, had post office box 563. As a little boy, I would walk to the post office with her every single day. That was the highlight of my day in the summers. So it's probably understandable that I view the latest attempt to stamp out the United States Postal Service as wrong-headed and short-sighted. There are those who believe strongly that the Postal Service should be operated by the lowest bidder. I guarantee you that if the USPS is privatized, rural America will be traumatized. Over 15,000 Missourians are employed by the Postal Service and 3,000 in the 5th Congressional District, which I represent. Every day, American families and businesses rely on the Postal Service for essential services, business, to obtain prescription medication, and to exercise their democratic right to vote. And so, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this extremely important opportunity to participate in this roundtable. And I thank you for keeping this in front of the American people so that they understand, those of us who are trying to support what is extremely important to most Americans, and those who are trying to block it for petty political reasons. I yield back. I can't get him. I can't hear him, but I can see him.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay. We seem to be having some technical difficulties. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think you went back on mute, sir.
All right. Can you hear me now?
I got you now.
All right. Mr. Secretary, I hope you can hear me. We've been having some challenges with our system.
Yeah, I can hear you fine now, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Well, tell us the words of wisdom you have for us.
Well, I'm not sure they're words of wisdom, but I think listening to you or Mr. Cleaver's opening comments, they're very appropriate words, because I couldn't agree more with virtually everything the two of you gentlemen had to say. And I want to commend you both for conducting this discussion. It's absolutely essential time for an essential organization. But just a little background. I'm here today in my capacity as chairman of the Package Coalition. That's a group of more than 20 really iconic American brands and companies and associations that represent those companies. And you're certainly familiar with most, if not all of them. Just to give you a flavor, eBay, CVS, Pitney Bowes, Amazon, the National Retail Federation, and the list goes on and on. And it's an organization that came together about 2 years ago, focused on a single issue, and that is preserving affordable and reliable postal package delivery services. And under normal circumstances, the postal service is an absolutely essential part of America's infrastructure and an important part of its economic growth, and that's particularly true in the e-commerce space. And as this unusual session would suggest, we're not living in normal circumstances. But that aside, the Postal Service has once again stepped forward and has proved the indispensable nature of what they do across the country when so many of us are sheltering at home. And I think it's undeniable. The Postal Service is a critical player in this time of pandemic and national service. And through it all, putting their lives at risk, the postal workers have helped to keep Americans safe by allowing them to stay in their homes more than they otherwise might. Postal workers are on the front lines. They're delivering to more than 160 million address points 6 days a week, often 7 days a week, as we all know, bringing medications, food, household goods, and so much more. And this isn't the first time. Mr. Chairman and Congressman Cleaver, you know this. We were all serving as members of the Congress during the 9/11 attacks, also during Hurricane Katrina. And we all remember how the Postal Service was often the first signs of return to normalcy. They were finding people and going places at a time where not everyone was willing to go, and they were delivering life-saving materials, important information. And this pandemic hasn't done us much good, but it has shown once more the indispensable nature of the Postal Service's nationwide infrastructure and network. And that has to be preserved for the simple reason that we can't afford not to have those services, I would argue, at any time, but certainly today in this time of crisis. And it is essential that the Congress find a way to provide emergency relief to the Postal Service so it can continue to do what it does so well and do what it does in such an important time. That can't be underscored. And I want to tip my hat to the House. And Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the HEROES Act, also the CARES Act. While disappointing in its outcome, at least in my mind, the House had provided a robust package, unfortunately, and the Senate had direct financial relief as well. But as you noted, Mr. Chairman, correctly, the administration rejected that. And as the former Postmaster General Brennan made pretty clear, without a direct cash infusion, there will likely come a time, and probably in not so many months, when the Postal Service will have to curtail its services, or perhaps even in extreme situations, shut down entirely. I can't imagine that happening at any time, but particularly right now. But if we don't find a way to provide that funds, that's really what we're inviting, and that would be absolute crisis and cataclysmic for virtually everybody in America. And that's why I so appreciate, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Cleaver, your recognition that this is really a matter of Homeland Security. It's a matter that this committee, I tip my hat for being concerned about it, and I wish you every best going forward. And I look forward to the discussion coming up. And with that, sir, I'll yield back to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your vision as to what the Postal Service means to this country. It's a strong argument you make. I now ask Congressman Cleaver to introduce our next witness.
It's a pleasure of mine to introduce Jim Sauber, who is the Chief of Staff of the National Association of Letter Carriers. And he's held this position of Chief of Staff to the President of the National Association of Letter Carriers since 2005. And in that role, he's responsible for coordinating the research, collective bargaining, public policy, and legislative activities of the union at the direction of President Rolando. In addition to his role as the letter carrier's front man, he previously served as the elected chair of the statutorily created Employee Thrift Advisory Committee. He's a native of Michigan. He earned a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Michigan and a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University. Mr. Sarver, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's really my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Congressman Cleaver, for the invitation. NALC represents 280,000 active and retired letter carriers across the country. Our 210,000 active members serve in every jurisdiction in every state of the country. I'm very proud to provide this service, especially now during this terrible pandemic. We see ourselves as frontline essential employees, and we're happy to be of service to our country in this time of need. Our package volume right now has been running at 60 to 90% normal levels. So on the one hand, the package business is booming, but the letter mail business has dropped off dramatically as a result of the shutdown of the economy. We believe this discussion today will help demonstrate how important the Postal Service is to our nation's public health and national security. An example, used it to distribute face masks in some of the COVID-19 hotspots around the United States to help contain the virus. And of course, the IRS is now using the Postal Service to distribute tens of millions of relief checks to American households to help them survive this pandemic. And it is our hope that soon we'll be able to distribute home testing kits across the country, and maybe even vaccines, self-administered vaccines when they're developed, so that we can finally put this terrible period in our country's history behind us. The Postal Service is really the country's only truly universal national communications and distribution network. Tens of millions of households of Americans who have little or no access to the internet, either in rural areas or in poor regions of our country. And while private delivery companies will usually touch 30 million households and businesses a day, our letter carriers and the Postal Service employees reach all 160 million delivery points each and every day, 7 and some 6 days a week, and sometimes even 7. In a national crisis, the Post Office gives the federal government a means to communicate with and a means to distribute information and material to every home in America. This is not just a theoretical capability, it's actually been tested in the past. In the years after 9/11 and the anthrax attacks, the CDC and the Department of Health and Human Services had a joint program called the City Readiness Initiative. And as part of that, they developed, in cooperation with the Postal Service, they developed a postal plan. The plan was to use letter carriers and our network to deliver antibiotics to large metropolitan areas in the event of a biological attack or some other kind of terrorist attack. It was tested in 5 urban area centers in 2012 and was found to work very well. Unfortunately, the funding for the City's Readiness Initiative lapsed in 2013 when we had the budget sequestration crisis, and so the program was discontinued. The current crisis poses an even greater serious national security danger, and that's a threat to the viability of the Postal Service itself. Because of the deep economic recession caused by the pandemic, there's been a huge decline in letter mail volume. The Postal Service could run out of cash reserves in just months. We have never needed taxpayer appropriations over the past 40 years, but the Postal Service desperately needs taxpayer support to survive this crisis. In that respect, we're no different than the airline industry or the hotel industry or many other industries in the country that have been shut down by this terrible pandemic. And now I think would be a good time to resume funding for the city's readiness initiative as well. So we're grateful for the HEROES Act, and it provides the much needed support. We thank both of you for voting for that bill when it came before the House. And I think today's discussion will make the case for passing that in the Senate even stronger. because we believe action to support the Postal Service is really action to support our national security and our public health infrastructure. So once again, thank you to both of you for inviting me for this important discussion. And it's really an honor to be back and talking to my old friend, John McHugh, as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. And, you know, I'm in one of those rural communities, and believe it or not, we don't have a drugstore. I think in the city, you all call them pharmacies, but in the country, we call them a drugstore. So most of us get our mail, our medicine by mail. So in that instance, the Postal Service is Benny Thompson's a drugstore, because it gets there, it gets delivered right on time, and I thank you. So you're filling some voids that some people take for granted, because they can go down on the corner and just get a prescription filled, but there are some nooks and crannies in America that still rely on the Postal Service for that. And what I'd like to ask both of you is from a preparedness standpoint, uh, national security and preparedness. I'll go with you, Mr. Secretary, first. Uh, how is the Postal Service prepared to help this country in time of uh, hurricanes or other kinds of, just like the pandemic we're going through right now? How do you see the Postal Service as being a player in this?
Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, let me just add to what you just said. The prescription drugs, and I love their description because we call them drugstores up in the rural area of New York where I'm from too. So, but the Postal Service delivered 1 billion prescriptions last year, 1 billion of them. Now, my mom's 95 years old, God love her. She is required by her insurance company, required to get her prescriptions, her maintenance prescriptions by mail, even though there's a dozen drugstores within 5 miles of where she happens to be right now. So just to underscore that. And to answer your question, the Postal Service is invaluable no matter what the challenge might be, because they do what they do every day, no matter what the circumstances are. You know, the old adage, neither rain nor sleet nor snow. You know, some people look at it as a cliche, but it's not. That's what they do. And therefore, how else in an unforeseen, as this COVID-19 crisis was unforeseen, in this next unforeseen thing, when you have to get something to every 160 million delivery points in the nation in one day, where else are you going to go? And during Katrina, I mentioned 9/11, the Postal Service continued to do their job. They were showing up at the football stadiums and delivering mail who were sheltering after Katrina. So, you know, you could describe any kind of national emergency or crisis, and it doesn't have to be nationwide. It can be localized, where you've got to get to everybody in a very short amount of time. The Postal Service is the logistics dream, just waiting to be utilized.
Mr. Sauber?
The part of our work that our members are most proud of, and I should remind everyone that a huge percentage of our members are former members of the U.S. Armed Forces. They have this sense of mission in the Postal Service that when troubled time comes, the idea is to show up and be there for your community. And as former Secretary McHugh said, you look back at just about every national crisis we've had over the last 20 years. There's a well-developed process for the Postal Service to reestablish service almost immediately. And our members are proud of that kind of work. And we know what it means to people when letter carriers start showing up. It means it's a sign of normalcy, that life is getting back to normal, and that there are certain things they can count on in life, and the Postal Service is one of them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I now yield to Mr. Cleaver for a question.
And either or both of you could respond to this. My my major concern right now, as we are looking at depression level unemployment, over 30 million people file for unemployment. We got a GDP that's probably humming right along at 0.2%, just barely humming at all. And then we have a plague on our hands. The only thing that hadn't hit are the frogs and the locusts. But I'm at a point now where I'm thinking that if on top of that, we end up shutting out the jobs of about 750,000 postal workers, do you think that there is any way that those employees could be if such a tragedy occurs, what is the likelihood that they will be quickly picked up and employed by somebody else? Or does that just push the U.S. economy even down further?
Jim, you want to start on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that would be a huge problem. Right now, there's a lot of excess workers. There's not a lot of jobs out there. There's certainly a lot of jobs like these where you can, these are livable jobs. These are jobs that you can raise a family on, and they don't pay a whole lot of money, but they're decent pay, and it makes it possible for people to save and to help their children with their education. So. No, there wouldn't be a lot of options out there for the Postal Service. What's really amazing right now is that the postal employment is one of the fastest growing jobs. The Postal Service is doing a tremendous amount of hiring right now, not because there's more demand, but because so many of our members have been sick or have been quarantined because they've been exposed to the virus. And so if you look at some of these job postings, postal carriers is one of the fastest growing new jobs, but those are not permanent positions. When our members recover and come back to work, those new hires are going to have to find jobs somewhere else. And right now, the labor market is just horrendous. So that's why it's so important to enact this HEROES Act in order to sustain American workers and their families until we can turn the economy around.
Thank you.
I would add, Congressman Cleaver, first of all, when you've got more than 26 million new unemployment filings in just the past several weeks, the thought of bringing 750,000 all at once back into that pool with any hope of meaningful rehiring is it's kind of stretching reality. But there's more to it than that. I mean, we all want an economic recovery, but I would argue without a postal service, that's going to be a heck of a lot harder. The reason being, I mentioned in my opening comments, e-commerce has been a really bright spot of our economy. And a big part of that is people in rural and remote locations being able to do what they couldn't do before. They can actually sell on a national and even international basis. Why? Because the Postal Service will take whatever it is they're selling to their customer, no matter where that customer may be. Similarly, they need supplies to do whatever it is they're doing. That is available because of the Postal Service bringing those supplies to them. If there's not a Postal Service to fulfill that role, these tens of thousands of small businesses that have started up in the last few years based on e-commerce are going to find it a lot harder, if not impossible, to continue business. If they can no longer afford it because they can't, either the private express carriers don't go where they are or go there unaffordably. So that makes our economic recovery even more challenging, and why preserving the Postal Service, it seems to me to be a pretty smart capitalist thing to want to do.
Well, I think you're correct. And you talked about some of the impact on this coronavirus is having on the workforce. I just happen to have some statistics I'd like to share with you. From a national perspective, we've had over 2,800 confirmed cases of coronavirus in the Postal Service. We've had almost 1,200 unconfirmed, And so we have about 4,000 employees who have been directly impacted with this coronavirus. But unfortunately, we've had almost 70 to pass. And you know, those numbers are very troubling. Uh, and I say seriously, they're actually part of our first responder system that we have here in this country. But one of the other things Congressman Cleveland and I can relate to, and former Secretary can also too, is when you talk about vote by mail, for instance. Now, guess who's going to carry uh, the, the the absentee ballot? Who's going to carry it back to its rightful place? So, so it is absolutely important that we have a postal service uh, in place so that, well, let's look at Oregon, for instance. They are 100% vote by mail. If you do away with it, uh, what are you going to put in its place? And they've, to the Postal Service's credit, they've not had any complaints about the system. Now, the other problem compounded to that is the fact that as long as this virus here, we're going to have to come up with some alternatives to the how we vote. So vote by mail is going to absolutely be important. And so I think we have to, and Congress has already put $400 million into the pot to improve our systems, but it's the Postal Service that is absolutely key to any vote by mail system, whether it's early voting, whether it's absentee voting, or what have you. It can only occur if, in fact, the Postal Service is alive and well. So, Mr. Secretary, you have some comments on the importance of vote by mail in the Postal Service?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I should note that the package coalition that I represent doesn't have a position on this, but I'll be happy to throw in John McHugh's 2 cents for whatever it's worth. As as you noted, um, we already have vote by mail. It's called absentee ballots. We have early voting, and I think I understand the political divide on this, but I think what has to be done is to try to develop a way to increase assurance that, this won't be an explosion of voter fraud. I'm not aware of any studies or evidence that suggest it would, but politically there's a concern about that. But how better to do that than through official representatives of the government bringing the ballots and taking them back? The United States Postal Service. And look, I don't think personally, again, not package coalition, but personally, I don't think you have to put your life at risk to vote. That doesn't seem to me to be very American. But in this particular crisis, given you're queuing up outside the ballot box and that you're certainly increasing your risk, if not directly putting your life on the line. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a constitutional scholar per se, but I'm not aware of any way to postpone the federal election, which is the other alternative. So I think you got to find a way to at least have the option in a viable manner.
Well, thank you. Jim, look like you want to have something to say on the subject.
Sure. I mean, well, I would just say, like um, Secretary McHugh, we're not, pushing this as a national solution. We are prepared to do whatever is necessary. We will be there for every state and local community that decides to expand vote by mail. There's no doubt about it. But I would say that even in normal times, the Postal Service is essential to our democracy. There are 8,000 election boards across the United States, and they absolutely rely on the Postal Service. Even if they change nothing from what they've done in the past, they rely on the Postal Service to conduct elections. They send out voter registration materials. They send out sample ballots. They give notifications to voters to where their polling places are. In the 2018 midterm election, 27% of all votes cast were cast on voted out on mailed out ballots. So it's already an integral part of our democracy. It has been from the start of the republic, when it's the primary means to share information at the 200 years ago was through newspapers. It's still a big part of campaigns, as I'm sure you guys know from the campaign materials you send out to voters to let them know where you stand on the issues. So the Postal Service has always been important to our democracy, and our members are very proud of that, and we're ready to step up to do whatever is necessary, whatever state and local governments decide about how to conduct this election in the safest possible way. We'll be ready to contribute.
Well, thank you very much. In my state, we send jury summons by mail.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of things that government rely on through the Postal Service that without it, I don't know how we function. So it's an absolute necessity from my perspective that not only do we have a postal service, but we have a healthy postal service, one that can not only get the job done, but do it like you've always done it. Most people think somehow we subsidize the postal service. You know, you operate on your own based on the fees that are generated. So sometimes that's also confusion. So I'll yield to Congressman Cleaver for a question.
Serious question, very serious question, because I got a 97-year-old father. If the U.S. Postal Service does not deliver Social Security checks, who do you think will? I mean, and of course, do we have whatever you think, whatever some replacement agency would be? What are all the security concerns? And anyway, I'm very concerned about that. And when I would like to tonight tell my father, what you guys said as it relates to Social Security checks.
I can, the answer to your question is, I have no idea who would do it. And here's the other problem. Who would do it will charge you to do it. And I doubt they'd go everywhere in Alaska and out in the outer islands of Hawaii and into the more rural communities. They're not going there now in many cases. So you're either going to have to pay through the nose, and that accelerates, the looming crisis we have on Social Security Trust Fund, because the Social Security accounts will have to pay for that. God knows how much increase to get it from Social Security into your dad's hands, and tens, if not hundreds, tens of millions of other senior Americans. So it doesn't portray a very happy future should that happen for Social Security or anybody who relies upon getting a check through the mail.
Yeah,
Well,
Representative Cleaver, you raise a really important issue about security. People, and this applies whether you're talking about people's financial information, their Social Security, their money, their government benefits, even their private communications. A big part of the Postal Service's culture is the protection of the sanctity of the mail. And so one of the things that every postal employee who's hired, they have a background check, and they have to they take an oath to uphold the law, and to tamper with the mail is not just a crime, a federal crime. It's a firing offense, and our members take that very seriously. So if you, in a world without the Postal Service, you'd have a very hard time replicating the safety and the efficiency of our universal service network. And as Secretary McHugh said, the cost of delivering in many parts of the country would just be exorbitant and not very reliable. So this is really important to keep this universal network in a sound and healthy operating position.
well, Mr. Secretary, you talked about the package coalition. can you just kind of tell us what your membership would have to deal with if we didn't have a postal service?
Well, without a postal service, a number, and I won't say point a finger at who, which ones, but a number of companies probably would no longer exist. And I know because I've had discussions with some of the leadership of the National Retail Federation, which, as I said, is a member. They represent tens of thousands of small businesses, and the concern they've shared with me is if somehow they get an unaffordable package cost increase, or the Postal Service cuts back or eliminates services, can't tell you how many of those tens of thousands of small businesses go out are crushed. Now, some of our companies are large and vibrant, and they'll find a way around it. But many of them are comprised of small businesses. Amazon's viewed as this megalith, right? And it's a big company. But the fact of the matter is, they have tens of thousands of small businesses that sell on their network. Similarly with eBay. But they've got to, those eBay and Amazon small companies got to be able to get their product. They got to be able to get their product affordably to their customers. And if that can't happen, or it's too expensive to continue, they're gone. Their margins of profit, where they even have profit, would bring tens of thousands of those small companies directly into going out of business.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that shocks a lot of people, is the fact that um, even with Amazon and eBay, they have contractual relationships with the Postal Service and those small companies. It's what you do with business. So, Jim, you got some comments about that?
That's exactly right, to focus on the small businesses. There's something like 18, before the pandemic, there was something like 18 or 20 million Americans who ran their businesses out of their homes. And it's everything from accountants and architects to people who produce art and provide specialty services. Those companies are especially reliant on the Postal Service. And just to show you what a difference we make during the pandemic, one of the reasons our volumes and packages are up so high is that some of the companies like FedEx and Amazon have told some of the people that they were providing delivery services to, we can't serve you anymore. We're going to service our own sales first. We're not going to use yours. We're not going to give delivery to your sales. So a lot of those folks have thank God they have the Postal Service, because we by law take in everything that people want us to deliver. You bring it to us, we're going to deliver it, no matter where it's going. So, and that includes not only the 160 million addresses in this country, but literally every address in the world through our arrangements with the Universal Postal Union. So it's an absolutely vital backstop for it complements what's available in the private sector, and it makes sure that these services are available to all Americans in an equitable fashion and at affordable rates.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. You have another question?
I'm concerned. You really got. I hadn't thought about the prospects of a lot of the rural areas. My district is Kansas City, which is our largest city in the state of Missouri. But I also represent Oric and Mayview and Sweet Springs and Odessa and Excelsior Springs. Little tiny towns all through my district, and I cannot. I don't know how the Postal Service does it, but they deliver mail out there to all my little towns every day. Do you actually think that Amazon or somebody, I don't know, the lowest bidder, would could actually economically afford to do what the U.S. Postal Service is already doing?
I don't think so. I mean, one of the, the three biggest customers the Postal Service has are Amazon, FedEx,
Amazon.
and UPS. They give us the volume that they don't want to deliver, or because they know we're the lowest cost provider. And there's a reason for that. The reason that Postal Service's rates are so affordable is that, particularly for package shippers, is that we're going to everybody's house already anyway. We're delivering newspapers, we're delivering invoices and advertisements and magazines. And so that because it's a shared network, the cost
And campaign literature.
yeah,
Campaign literature, Jim.
Yeah.
right. So they're not going to do it, not without us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and again, and we're gonna have to kind of wrap it up. But I think, and Jim, when we were talking, can you just kind of share um, some results of the poll that you all did about what the public thinks about the Postal Service?
Sure. Yeah, we did a poll. We commissioned a poll. It was actually done by two polling firms. One was a Democratic polling firm, and the other was a Republican polling firm, Hart Research and North Star Public Opinion. And we did a national poll that showed just overwhelming positive support from the American people. There's virtually no difference between Democrats, Republicans, or independents. There's a universal, the favorability of the Postal Service is extraordinarily high. And what was really interesting in the poll is that it showed that the public supports providing taxpayer assistance to the Postal Service to help it survive the pandemic by overwhelming numbers, 3-1. And again, with very little difference between Democrats, Republicans, or independents. And that providing that assistance actually polled much better than in fact the public really didn't like the idea of raising package prices or only giving assistance to the Postal Service through more debt, more lending. So it just shows the country really loves this institution. It's integral to our democracy and our society. And so I think, if what our hope is that the Congress, obviously the House has already done this, but we hope that the Congress will follow the lead of the American people and support this important institution.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, could I add a couple thoughts?
Oh, absolutely.
First of all, Package Coalition is totally nonpartisan. I mean, we try and we are working with everybody. So I'm going to step aside from the Package Coalition and speak as John McHugh, lifelong Republican. I don't get the political strategy of all of this. I don't see how the president and his people think that by bringing the Postal Service to its knees, perhaps several weeks or a month or whatever it turns out to be just before an election in a time of pandemic is a winning formula. But whether they're not focused on it that way or whether they don't have time to think about it, it's a reality that's afoot here if something isn't done. And that's why we're hopeful. Again, I agree with Jim Sauber, tip of the hat to you and your colleagues and the House. But we're trying to do what we can to talk, particularly to Republican senators, because they're the majority over there, and try to explain to them the impact of all the things that we've talked about over the last hour, and trying to help them better understand what could happen from a political perspective. Because the letter carriers, Jim Sauber's People's Poll is reflected in other polls. The Republicans support, according to these polls, direct cash infusion into the Postal Service. So this is not from the administration side, I would argue you're not on a winning path and a winning strategy. But I don't work for the President's Reelect Committee. And maybe they've got a secret weapon about that I'm unaware of.
Well, if destroying our postal service is a winning strategy, then a lot of us are going to be on the other side. So let me thank both of you for what I think has been a wonderful opportunity to discuss the Postal Service, its nexus to national security, and other things. It's absolutely important. So what I'd like to do is ask Congressman Cleaver if he has any closing statements he'd like to say.
All that you do and a number of other areas. I'm blessed to be on this committee, serving under your leadership. Let me just say, look, I think there's a lot of arrogance afoot in the world today, and I was talking about the Postal Service with someone who's probably otherwise a good and decent human being, and they said, well, people don't use the Postal Service anymore. People send emails. Well, that is about as arrogant as you can get. If you put a laptop in front of my father, he's going to probably throw it at you. He doesn't want it. He not only doesn't know how to use the computer, he doesn't want to know how to use the computer. He wants to write out his checks. He wants to write out his letters. And I just think it's horrible for us to have generational arrogance that all of a sudden the elders, the people who built this country, who are not computer literate, we say, well, I'm sorry, you just have to go out and learn how to send emails. That's absolutely crazy. The other and final part is I'm about 12 blocks to the north of where you see me sitting from the national headquarters of Hallmark Cards. There are people who don't believe they are eloquent enough to go to the computer and make up a birthday card or a Mother's Day card. And Hallmark Cards hired Maya Angelou, and she did Hallmark Cards up until her death. And there would be people who would stand in line to buy one of those cards and drop it in the mail. They wanted that a part of the expression of love is getting the card. And Hallmark, there's a secret about the Hallmark people probably don't know. The cost of the card is always on the back, down in the right-hand corner.
Yeah.
And you say, well, most people when they get a gift, they want to scratch out, but they want people to know that this is a Hallmark card, the #1 greeting card company in the world. Whoever's giving you this card cares about you. So that's more preachy than political. But I can tell you, we need to back away from this. Everybody needs to go to the computer because my dad's not going to do it. My mother-in-law is not going to do it, and they shouldn't be forced to do it.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with you. Facts about it for a minute, Congressman. I thought you was talking about me. Checks and other things. But there are just some things that clearly we're going to have to manage over time, and we don't have to throw out the other things. So I want to give our witnesses, if they have some closing comments they'd like to make, please feel free. Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Again, thanks to you and to Congressman Cleaver for paying attention to this and understanding that it really is a matter of Homeland Security and the Postal Service's important role in all of this. I'd really be remiss if I didn't tip my hat off to all the postal workers across the line. All of them understand they're virtually putting their lives at risk. But living in a rural area myself, I want to give a particular thanks to Jim Sauber, my old friend, and not old but longtime friend, and his letter carriers, because they're doing incredible work, and God love them for taking it on. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thanks again.
Thank you, Jim.
It is really a pleasure to be part of this discussion. I think it's, I just make one last comment responding to something that Congressman Cleaver said. It's not just the elderly folks who love the Postal Service. The other group that most loves the Postal Service are millennials. They've grown up, they use the Postal Service differently than their parents and grandparents do. But this is the beauty of this institution. It constantly reinvents itself. to meet the evolving needs of the country. And we think it's really important to help us survive this pandemic so that we can do that for many, many years to come. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you very much. And, you know, the Postal Service connects America. As our constituents comply with stay-at-home orders to stop the spread of coronavirus, postal workers have been working overtime. I want to thank the postal workers for their commitment to our communities and let them know that we have their back. I also want to thank Secretary McHugh and Mr. Saber for participating in today's virtual forum, and for my colleague and fellow United Methodist, Mr. Reverend Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, for his commitment to helping save the Postal Service. Thank you very much.